The quick brown fox jumped over the lazy dog. It wasn't exactly clear why she did this, but she probably had a good reason. The dog had a perfectly fine excuse for his laziness. He was old, and his eyes worked about as well as if they'd been made of glass. He didn't even see the fox coming in the first place, so there was no reason for him to move out of the way. That was for young dogs who hadn't yet retired. After some time, the neurotic orange cat walked up to the lazy dog and prodded him with his paw. The dog gave a low, grumbling sound to signal that it was paying attention with as little movement as possible.
"Hey," said the cat. "Major, did you see what just happened?"
With some effort, Major lifted one of his eyelids. It was hard because the skin was so stretched and droopy that even when he opened as wide as he could, his eyes still looked half closed.
Whiskers?
"There was a fox. Just here,"
Whiskers said.
Didn't you see?"
Came the low grumble.
Was. So, they're gone then?
"In a flash. Even I barely saw them. They got over the garden fence before I could even move."
I thought cats were supposed to be quick.
Neurotic as he was, Whiskers was still a cat, and this meant he was a creature of pride. If anyone else had said this to him, he would have drawn himself up and smacked them across the face with a clawless paw, then bolted off before they'd even cried out to show how fast he could be. There was no point in doing this to Major, because Major would have barely even registered it. He probably would have just gone back to sleep.
"Don't you think you should have barked?
Whiskers said, in an effort to change the subject.
Even a little?"
I'm retired.
Major muttered through half-open lips.
Anyway, you never liked it.
That much was certainly true. When Major wasn't so old, it was a constant stream of
Get off my lawn!
and
You're so lucky I'm not chasing you.
he'd had so much more intensity and fight back then, but hadn't been even an ounce more curious than he was now. Whiskers wondered whether this meant that his own curiosity would be safe when the years finally came for him. Whiskers said a couple other things, but if Major heard them, he gave no indication. They bounced off his thick hide with the same efficacy as one of Whiskers' swats. Ordinarily, Whiskers wasn't too put off by this, but as he returned to his post on the patio, which had the best view of the sun in the afternoon, his eyes strayed to Major more often than he would have liked. So rarely did the dog move that if Whiskers had stumbled onto the scene without any prior knowledge, he might have assumed that he was looking at a corpse. Whiskers' life seemed to be filled to the brim with existential dooms. Between the strained wheezing of Major's fading breath and the baleful gaze of the sun, Whiskers was convinced that it had turned upside down and that this spelled some uncertain catastrophe in the near future. There was more than enough for any one cat to deal with. Still, there was something about these ever-advancing fears that caught his eye and kept him from moving it anywhere else. Part of the problem was that there was precious little else to look at most of the time. Today, though, it was the fence that drew his eye most of all. He found himself eyeing the spot where that bushy tail had disappeared, wondering what that fox's business might have been. Major had never bothered to wonder about anything, even when he was younger. That wasn't the point of barking. There was a blemish on the fence today, a few spots of mud leading vertically up from one another where the fox had jumped over. Paw prints, Whiskers reasoned. After a few minutes of stretching, he hopped down from his station and made his way across the yard. It wasn't just the fence. Mud flecked the tips of grass blades all the way through. Perhaps, Whiskers thought, she was running from something and hadn't had enough time to clean herself off. Whatever the case, she'd certainly lost her pursuer. Finally, he arrived at the fence and stared up at the top, which had always proved just a hair too high for him to reach. Then again, maybe today was different. The fox had made it after all. He tensed himself up, wiggled his rear end to make sure he was ready, and uncoiled all at once, launching himself as high as he could. For a moment, he thought he was going to make it, and then gravity reasserted its authority. He hit the fence on the way down, but not hard enough to discourage him from trying again. The result was the same every time, though. He just barely came up short. After about 10 or so minutes of this, he finally laid down in front of the fence, defeated and tired. "Now, what would you want over here that you don't have over there?" came a voice from the other side, slightly muffled by the wood blocking its path. It had a smooth quality to it, like the brushing of waves of grass in an open field.
Did you see a fox go by?
Whiskers said, resigned to his fate.
I'm sure they jumped right over your fence, too. I'm trying to find them.
There was a pause. Without seeing who was on the other side, Whiskers had no idea what the owner of that voice was thinking about. "My fence," she eventually said. "This is your fence, isn't it?"
Are you telling me there's not a fence on the other side of your yard?
Again, the voice paused for a moment. "What did you want with this fox, anyway?" Whiskers thought about his life here in the backyard. When he was a kitten and things were new, he'd spend hours, sometimes entire nights, padding through what little shrubbery there was, pretending to stalk invisible mice in the grass. His eyes would lock onto empty space, and he'd coil himself tight, leap forward as fast and far as he could, and inevitably end up with nothing between his paws. Still, it was stimulation. Sometimes Mama would come out and throw a ball for Major, and he'd go scrabbling across the yard with ungainly enthusiasm, only to bring the ball back coated thickly enough in saliva that Mama's fingertips would sink in when she grabbed it again. She'd throw it again and again until the sun went down and she wiped off her hand. Or Major, hearing something outside and straightening his entire body toward the disturbance. Or Major, fully extended upward, eyes barely poking above the fence, barking at anything that dared come onto his street.
Come on,
Whiskers said.
Aren't you even a little curious? You must know how it is, sitting in your yard all day, looking up at the sun, nothing else to do, and someone comes tearing past you at Mach 10, and you just don't care. Am I going crazy?
What if it was something stupid?
What do you mean?
What if she was just going to take the food from her favorite trash bin before the people emptied it out, and she was running late?
Then, at least I'll know.
What if she didn't have any plans at all? What if she was just running?
Don't be ridiculous. Nobody runs away like that if they don't have a goal.
Oh yeah? What about you? A claw tapped twice on the other side of the wood, sharp and quick. What's your goal? A rush of gratitude came over Whiskers as he processed the question. The nimbleness of the fox and the height of the fence had humbled him, and he needed a way to recover. He flexed his paw and tapped that against the fence in response. It was an unimpressive sound. Knocking was hard, with only pads.
As if you even needed to ask,
he said, letting sweet, sweet pride filter into his syllables.
You must have seen it by now. The sun is upside down. I'm thinking of a way to fix it.
The next words he heard were not impressed and awestruck by this revelation like he'd expected, but rather resigned. You see it too, then. Whiskers had imagined this moment many times over the past few days. They would have been joyous and excited, two minds alike, rejoicing at the company of the other. They might have discussed plans to fix things, or ways to enjoy the remainder of their days. The possibility of melancholy hadn't quite entered his mind. "I'll see you tonight," the voice said, now in a hushed tone, "after sunset. If you can make it over the fence, that is." Then he heard soft footsteps padding away, and nothing more. The sun was partway through its downward journey, but still high enough that he had plenty of time. His eyes didn't water as much as they used to when he stared at it, which he took to mean that either its rays were weakening or he was growing stronger. Either way, he thought, it was certainly a good thing. The following few hours were some of the worst of his entire life. He jumped and jumped again, reaching and failing, watching as the sun went down. As he tired, his jumps stalled and began to weaken. At the start, his paws managed to barely peek over the edge once or twice, but as his legs tired, their peaks began slipping. Every jump was another stab at his hope, and every new low he reached was a mangled whimpering. Every so often he would curl up where the fence met the ground and sigh to himself, over and over. He'd stare up at the sun-caked, muddy footprints, and then lower his head again, over and over, until their taunting presence brought him back to trying. The entire affair might have been a little better if he could have left claw marks streaming down the side to show his failures. Or maybe, if he'd had mud of his own, he could see how much he'd tried. He would have even jumped if the fence had a fresh layer of wet paint, even though it would have stained his pads, just to see some kind of progress. As the sun, too, drifted below the top of the fence, he let out an anguished yowl and slumped down in panting defeat.
"This is it,"
He thought to himself.
"I never got to see what was on the other side of the fence, and I'll never find out what that fox was up to. The sun is falling, and I'm going to turn into Major. Old and wrinkly, and nothing left to do in my life but wait for the last bits of my brain to drain out my ears. And then, after everything's said and done and I'm just a pile on the floor, it'll still..."
Whiskers?
The cat had been so lost in thought that he hadn't even heard the heavy, deliberate footfalls of that old dog, who now stood with him by the fence. There was concern in what little Whiskers could see of his eyes.
I've never seen you like this, Whiskers. What's wrong?
Whiskers stared up at the fence. He didn't want to admit his own incompetence, not to Major of all people. Back when Major was a real dog, he probably could have jumped this without any trouble. Whiskers might have been a weakling, but that didn't mean Major needed to know about it. The trouble was that in his exhaustion, he could hardly think of an excuse. All he really wanted to do right now was sit and rest his aching legs.
I could give you a boost.
Major mused.
You almost made it a few times before.
Whisker's eyes went to slits when he heard this.
"You mean you were watching?"
Just for a while.
Major yawned.
And then I went back to sleep. Just stand on my back and you'll have enough height.
"But what if there's just another fence on the other side, and I'm trapped?"
Yeah, like you just did, and Mama will get you. We're lucky like that.
Major made an odd platform. It was hard to stand on him without the skin slipping from under Whisker's paws and threatening to throw him off either side or splay him out on top. The dog's actual frame was a little shaky underneath as well, although Whiskers would never have noticed just from looking at him. He looked so stout that feeling something almost frail underneath was disconcerting. Jumping was going to be a problem too. His paws would have to sink a little before he could launch. Still, from atop his back, the rim seemed much more reachable. Whiskers huffed and steadied himself as much as he could, before coiling as he had done so many times before. Once he was sure he was good and ready, the neurotic orange cat jumped off the lazy dog. As he reached the top of his arc, He angled himself forward and let the front half of his body come down on the other side. It was painful. The triangular fence tops jabbed into his gut, but with a few kicks from his hind legs, he managed to drag himself over. He was standing at the top of a hill with dead tree stumps scattered along the way down until all plant life stopped for a road in the valley beneath. He'd seen that road before, but never from this angle. It was only when they were driving to the White Room, and only from inside the car. The muddy tracks weaved through the stumps, across the road, and faded just before a little group of trees that had escaped the culling of their siblings, huddled together into something that was either a glade or a forest. Perhaps the most amazing thing to Whiskers was that when he looked to the west, he saw the road stretch on and on until it converged at the horizon. Still hanging above that horizon, which was of course much lower than the fence he'd just escaped, was an orange sun that painted the surrounding sky colors Whiskers had never seen before. Maybe it was upside down, he thought, but that didn't stop it from being beautiful. A soft whoo from the other side brought Whiskers out of his momentary reverie.
Anything interesting?
Major rumbled.
Yes.
Worth it?
Yes.
Good. I'm going back to sleep.
This was the first time that Whiskers enjoyed looking at the sun. There was a breeze running through his fur, and the occasional passing of a car made a pleasant brushing sound to his ear. The bouquet of rose and orange slowly shifted and adjusted until it was purple and blue. And then even those last hints of color began to fade to deep navy. The entire world slowly drained itself of color for the evening, and he watched the process with interest. He'd seen the darkening before, of course. It happened inside the yard, too. But it wasn't new there. So, came the voice, you managed it. Whiskers looked to the trees, and there was the fox. She was taller than him, and her pupils were smaller. Her eyes were a flash of amber against a dark backdrop. Congratulations.
You could have just said you were the fox from the start.
Whiskers pouted.
Why did you pretend?
Do I need a reason?
It's just kind of rude otherwise.
With as much of a smirk as the fox's facial structure could accommodate, foxes always look a little smug to begin with, so this worked well. She leapt forward from the forest and crossed the road in a few loping bounds. From there, it was an easy trot up the hill, and then she stood above Whiskers. She was nowhere near as large as Major, but it wasn't hard to be bigger than Whiskers. I came through your yard because it was somewhere I hadn't been yet. That's my only reason. Whiskers gaped up at her. But since you made it, she continued, I'll give you some free advice. There's nothing you can do about the sun. You're only a tiny little cat after all. The people have been to space, and even they can't flip the sun back from what I understand. Otherwise, they would have done it by now. If you want a purpose so bad, find a new one.
Don't you think you should still care about the sun?
The fox's smirk dropped for a moment. It depresses me, she said, and then a more genuine smile spread across her face. But whatever, right? You're out now, aren't you? You own the world, just like I do, at least until the sun does whatever it's gonna do. Just forget it, I say. Explore. Have yourself a good time.
But the sun...
I said forget it, didn't I? Listen, if it helps, you can run with me so you don't have to think about it. Briefly, Whiskers wondered what a life with this fox would be like. Running through any yard they could get into, eating the choicest foods they could scavenge, never needing to eat another one of those white pills Mama gave him. They would own the world and everything in it. It would all be their yard, with their toys. Mice would flow from every shrub, and sparrow songs would offer every opportunity to silence them. As he assessed the issue of his future, a small piece of the past clicked into place in his brain. He sat quietly for a moment to make sure, and then, nodding slowly, asked another question.
What about the mud?
Pardon?
You said there was no reason for you to run through our yard, but you left muddy tracks the entire way. I can't imagine that being muddy was comfortable, but you were in so much of a hurry that you hadn't cleaned yourself off yet. Why?
The fox sat and stared at him for a long time, her tail flicking back and forth. Perhaps, Whiskers thought, she was coming up with a lie. She had certainly demonstrated willingness aplenty. "Listen, you're a clever cat," she eventually said. "Very observant. You'd figure out a way to put anything I said under suspicion. And good on you. But you're not going to find anything interesting here. There was a mud puddle just down the road from your yard, and I played in it for a while. Will that suffice for you?"
I've heard all I needed to hear, Whiskers purred, if that's what you're asking. We clearly are never going to trust each other. Major might be lazy, stupid, and old, but I never have to wonder about the things he says.
"The dog?" scoffed the fox. "Not worth your time. When I was a kit, I lived in that hollow, just over there. My poor mother, bless her, had a bad leg, so she couldn't do much hunting. It was roadkill for us. Every night she could get it. She'd split the carcasses up so that she got the part with the tire mark every time. And do you know who was there every time the roads were clear enough for her to limp out and grab dinner? He said he'd rip out her throat and then feed it to her. Every other night, I'd wake up and she'd be crying. Nightmares, every time, about him breaking through these wooden planks and finding defenseless, tiny me." In the span of this conversation, she'd gone from smug to genuine to agitated. Her eyes, which had been thoroughly trained on Whiskers before, were now staring so intently at the fence that Whiskers thought it might fall over. It had all happened very suddenly, a stark contrast to Major's ever-present aura of relaxation. He wanted to take a step back, but he'd never been one to look away from catastrophe before, and he wasn't about to start now. "He probably doesn't have any idea," the fox said, "what it's like. I'll bet he's never gone a day in his life without food. Never had to ask if his life was worth the effort of keeping him around. But you're right. I have no doubt that he's lazy and stupid. He's certainly old, isn't he?"
Maybe that's how he was,
Whiskers said carefully.
but he didn't bark at you this time, did he? He said he's retired.
It was a simple motion, just a turn. She didn't growl, but she did loom, and Whiskers suddenly felt very aware of the size difference between the two of them. He was aware of her claws and the fact that in her mouth were sharp fangs. He was aware that her eyes, which had threatened to bowl the fence over only moments ago, were now pointed at him with the same force. "Retired," she said with the same kind of pressurized calm that one might find at the bottom of an ocean trench. "Well, I'm sure he thinks it was a wonderful career. What a good dog, living out his days peacefully." The urge to step back had built and grown into something more pressing now. Whiskers felt his haunches quiver, preparing for something that he himself didn't fully understand. Still, he didn't move. It was inertia. The only way for him to move at this point would be a sudden shock of some kind, like a loud sound or the sun exploding. Until something like that happened, the sensation would continue to build without an apparent end. Would you choose someone like him over someone like me? You can choose not to trust me all you want, but I've never threatened murder. If I have to hunt, it's quick and quiet. Respectful.
I don't even know you.
You didn't know him either, Cat. Now, choose. Somewhat stupidly, Whiskers said,
My name is Whiskers.
despite everything that he'd observed about her up to now. Despite the fact that he was still here when every piece of him was begging to run. Quiet observation had hardened into defiance, even at the potential cost of his life. Certainly, it seemed like the fox was weighing that cost as an option. It was like she moved without moving, breathed without breathing, approached while staying completely rooted to the ground. Just when Whiskers expected a pounce, she sat back and relaxed into the smirk she'd started things off with. Well, that makes sense. We certainly couldn't have called you Claws, could we? And that was it. Whiskers felt a snap as his entire body descended into chaos. A fluffy paw shot forward and swatted the fox's face, weakly, of course, but the fox's backward leap was more than enough satisfaction for him, who took off as fast as his legs would carry him. It was all an automatic process. He had no conscious part to play in the matter. Instead of moving toward the hollow or back around to the front of the house, he went in the direction of the setting sun, down the road. The fox didn't bother following him, but she did watch as he went. After some time, his tiny frame disappeared from her view, and she padded back to her patch of trees to search for some dinner. No matter how far Whiskers ran, the sun didn't reappear over the horizon. His stamina, already eaten into by the harsh day, only carried him to a T intersection, where he lost even the option to head straight. The moon above wasn't upside down, at least. It smiled on him from its normal orientation. In the stark, cold light of the night, a million questions raced in his head. For as dangerous a threat as he believed the sun to be, he somehow had bigger problems now. From the shrub that he decided would be his home for the evening, he saw visions. Every shaded corner seemed to contain the fox, staring silently and then receding under the focus of Whiskers' eyes. Every rumbling of a distant car seemed the sleepy growl of Major, and every rustle of leaves in the breeze seemed a drowsy sigh. Any passing headlight could have been Mama, searching in the hopes of taking him back to the yard. The leaves were cool to the touch and invariably connected to jagged branches, and the air was stiff tonight. It was a poor substitute for the cat mattress at home. Still, once the morning came and the horrors receded, there would be a great many things to look at and a great many directions to move. He would have the chance to catch a mouse, or to stalk a bird, or to watch lazily from the top of a house as cars went rushing by. He found himself, against his own instinct and judgment, wishing for the sun to return, dire threat and all.